How do you destroy a man's entire world with just 5 letters arranged in a perfect sequence of genetic code? 13 letters spelling out the most devastating words imaginable. DNA results. On November 30th, 2013, the lifeless body of a Florida preacher's wife lay sprawled across her bedroom floor, her blood seeping into the pale carpet. The killer stood mere feet away, his hands still gripping the knife that had stolen her life, and he was her husband. A man who had once preached about love, forgiveness, and holy matrimony now stood as the architect of an unspeakable massacre. Outside, the quiet suburban neighborhood remained oblivious. Manicured lawns and pristine white picket fences concealed the horror that had just unfolded behind closed doors. The only sounds were the distant chirp of crickets and the soft, steady dripping of blood. Some families keep secrets, some secrets keep families, and some secrets destroy everything. This is the story of Michael Reese, a preacher who would learn that the most dangerous betrayals often come from those closest to us. If you're enjoying our content, quickly hit subscribe to join our community and never miss a moment. Let's dive in. Michael Reese wasn't just another pastor. At 42, he was a towering figure in Florida's religious landscape, a third-generation minister whose sermons could electrify a congregation of thousands. Standing 6'2", with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes, he cut an imposing figure behind the pulpit of Grace Community Church in suburban Tampa. Born into a family of ministers, Michael had preaching in his blood. From a young age, he understood the power of words, the way they could lift spirits, heal wounds, and transform lives. His father and grandfather had been respected church leaders, and Michael had carried that legacy with a sense of divine purpose. He wasn't just delivering speeches, he was delivering hope. Grace Community Church was more than just a building. It was Michael's kingdom. Over 15 years, he had grown the congregation from a modest 200 members to nearly 3,000. His messages were a perfect blend of fire and compassion, condemning sin while promising redemption. Parishioners hung on his every word, seeing him as more than a pastor. He was a spiritual guide, a moral compass in a world they believed was losing its way. At home, Michael was the epitome of a devoted family man. 5 children, Emma, Jacob, Luke, Sophie, and Benjamin, whom he adored. His wife Sarah was his partner in both ministry and life, running the church's youth programs and supporting his every mission. To the outside world, the Reese family was perfection personified, a testament to the power of faith, love, and spiritual dedication. But perfection, as Michael would soon discover, was nothing more than an illusion. Sarah Reese represented the quiet strength behind Michael's public persona. At 38, she was the graceful, understated counterpart to her husband's charismatic leadership. As the church's youth director, Sarah possessed a gentle yet powerful ability to connect with young people, guiding them with a compassion that seemed to flow effortlessly. Born into a prominent religious family from Jacksonville, Sarah had been groomed for a life of ministry since childhood. She wasn't just a pastor's wife, she was a strategic partner in their spiritual mission. Her intelligence was subtle but sharp. She managed the church's youth programs with a precision that made them the most successful in the region. Teenagers trusted her in a way they rarely trusted adults, seeing her as a confidant rather than an authority figure. Physically, Sarah was striking in her own understated way. Medium height with auburn hair usually pulled back in a neat ponytail, and warm brown eyes that could instantly communicate understanding or concern. She dressed conservatively, mostly tailored suits in muted colors, always professional, never drawing unnecessary attention to herself. Behind the scenes, Sarah was the organizational backbone of the Reese family and ministry. She managed their home with the same meticulous care she applied to church programs. 5 children, Emma, Jacob, Luke, Sophie, and Benjamin, were her world. Each child was carefully nurtured, their individual talents recognized and encouraged. To the congregation, Sarah was the perfect pastor's wife, supportive, humble, and deeply committed to their spiritual community. She led by example, volunteering for charity drives, organizing community outreach programs, and always presenting a picture of domestic and spiritual harmony. But beneath that calm exterior, Sarah carried secrets. Secrets that would soon tear their perfect world apart. The Reese household was a carefully orchestrated symphony of faith, discipline, and carefully maintained appearances. Sunday mornings were a meticulously planned ritual. Michael would stand at the pulpit, his family seated in the front row, a visual representation of pastoral perfection. Sarah would help the younger children, Sophie and Benjamin, sit quietly, while Emma, Jacob, and Luke sat with a discipline that seemed almost unnatural for their ages. At home, the rhythm of their days followed a strict pattern. Mornings began with family prayer at 6 a.m. sharp. Michael believed in starting each day with spiritual fortification. The children would gather around the dining table, heads bowed, as Michael's deep voice filled the kitchen with scripture and benedictions. Breakfast was always prepared by Sarah, nutritious, balanced meals that reflected the same precision she applied to every aspect of their lives. Homework time was sacred. Michael insisted on academic excellence as much as spiritual growth. Each child had designated study hours, with Sarah supervising, gently guiding, but never directly interfering. Emma, the eldest at 16, was already showing promise as a future leader. She was involved in church youth programs, maintained straight A's, and seemed to embody everything her parents had hoped for in a daughter. Jacob, at 14, was more reserved. Where Emma was outgoing, he was introspective. Michael saw potential in his quiet demeanor, often speaking about how true leadership wasn't about volume, but about depth of character. Luke, 12, was the family's spirited child, athletic, curious, always asking questions that sometimes made the adults exchange knowing glances. Sophie, 9, was the sensitive one. She had her mother's compassionate heart, always the first to notice if someone seemed sad or troubled. And Benjamin, the youngest at 6, was the family's joy, a bright-eyed boy who looked at his father with an adoration that seemed almost too pure to be real. Dinner was their daily reunion. No matter how busy the day, the family never missed this time together. Michael would ask each child about their day, listening intently. Sarah would serve home-cooked meals, always ensuring everyone's plate was full, their needs met. Conversations were a blend of spiritual lessons, school updates, and gentle parental guidance. But beneath this perfect surface, something was brewing. Something that would soon shatter the carefully constructed world of the Reese family. It was a crisp autumn evening when Emma first brought up the DNA test. The family was gathered around their dining table, the soft glow of the chandelier casting warm shadows across their faces. Homework papers and textbooks were scattered between plates of Sarah's homemade lasagna, a Thursday night tradition. "Dad," Emma said, her voice bright with the excitement of a school project, "we're doing a genealogy assignment in my advanced biology class. Everyone's supposed to trace their family history using DNA testing." She looked up, her eyes sparkling with the kind of academic enthusiasm Michael had always encouraged. Michael smiled, setting down his fork. "That sounds fascinating, sweetheart. What exactly does the project involve?" Emma pulled out a brochure from her backpack. "We get these DNA kits. They map out your genetic ancestry, show potential relatives, ethnic backgrounds, everything." Her younger siblings leaned in, suddenly interested. Jacob raised an eyebrow. Luke nearly knocked over his water glass in excitement, while Sophie and Benjamin watched with wide-eyed curiosity. Sarah's hand, which had been carefully placing a slice of lasagna on Benjamin's plate, paused. Something flickered in her eyes, just for a moment. A hesitation so quick, so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. "I think it would be amazing if we all did it together," Emma continued, her enthusiasm infectious. "Imagine discovering something about our family we never knew." Michael reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. "What do you think, honey?" Sarah's smile seemed to freeze for just a second. "I'm not sure it's entirely accurate. These tests can be complicated." But Michael was already reaching for his phone. "Nonsense. It sounds like a wonderful family activity." None of them knew that this simple moment, this innocent suggestion of a DNA test, would be the first tremor before an earthquake that would destroy everything they believed about their family. 2 weeks after ordering the DNA kits, a small package arrived. The white envelope with the genetic testing company's logo sat on the kitchen counter, surrounded by the family's anticipation. Emma carefully opened the package and pulled out 5 individual testing kits, one for each family member. That evening, they followed the instructions meticulously. Swabs were collected and carefully sealed in their individual tubes. Michael oversaw the process, ensuring everyone followed the directions precisely. Sarah remained quiet, her movements mechanical, her eyes avoiding direct contact with anyone. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. They were sent directly to Michael's office. Michael Reese's office at Grace Community Church was a sanctuary of order. Bookshelves lined with theological texts, carefully organized files, and a large mahogany desk stood as a testament to his years of dedicated ministry. That Tuesday morning, as his administrative assistant scheduled appointments and the church hummed with quiet activity, an unexpected package arrived. The genetic testing kit envelope rested on his desk, almost innocuous. Michael had been excited about Emma's school project, viewing it as another opportunity to demonstrate family unity. He had encouraged all of them to participate, seeing it as a chance to explore their family's rich heritage. With careful precision, he opened the package. Inside were 5 envelopes, one for each child. His pastoral duties momentarily forgotten, Michael opened them to view results. At first, everything looked normal. Ethnic background, genetic markers, and other standard information that would help Emma with her school presentation. But then, something caught his eye. A detail so small yet so significant that it made his breath catch in his throat. He cleared his throat, staring intently at each letter. His brow furrowed deeply. "This can't be right," he muttered. The genetic markers told a story he wasn't prepared to hear. A story that would destroy everything he believed about his family, his marriage, and his entire existence. Michael read the results again and again. The scientific language was clinical, cold, devastating. Genetic analysis, biological match paternity confirmation, negative, closest genetic match, immediate family member. His mind raced. One thought repeated like a terrible drumbeat. These children, Emma, Jacob, Luke, Sophie, Benjamin, were not his, not biologically his. But the truly horrifying detail? The closest genetic match was his own father, Reverend Daniel Reese. It's that Michael's hand trembled. Decades of sermons about truth, about moral integrity, about family, all of it seemed to collapse around him. The perfectly constructed world he had built as a pastor, as a father, as a husband, shattered in 13 letters of genetic code. He looked at the clock. The children would be in school. Sarah would be at home, preparing for the evening's church activities. Something inside Michael began to change. The compassionate pastor disappeared. In his place, a cold, calculating stranger emerged. He grabbed his keys. He knew exactly where he was going. Home. The drive home was a blur of suburban streets and rising internal chaos. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, mind replaying every moment of his marriage. Subtle hints he'd missed. Sarah's nervous glances, his father's frequent, seemingly innocent visits. When he arrived home, the house was eerily quiet. Sunlight filtered through pristine curtains, casting shadows across the immaculate living room. He could hear movement upstairs. Sarah, likely preparing for her evening church responsibilities. Michael moved with a predator's precision, each step calculated, each breath controlled. Sarah sat in their bedroom, a Bible open before her, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up, sensing something different in his approach. "You're home early," she said, her smile hesitant. Michael held the DNA results in his hand. No greeting, no preliminary conversation. "Explain this," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that contained years of betrayal. Sarah's hand trembled slightly, her eyes darting between Michael and the DNA results. The silence was thick with unspoken accusations. "Michael," she began, her voice carefully measured, "I can explain." "Explain what?" he interrupted, his voice unnervingly calm. "How every single one of our children shares genetic markers with my father. How you've been living this lie." Her glasses slipped, falling onto the open Bible. The pages seemed to tremble beneath her fingertips. "It wasn't what you think," Sarah whispered, but the words rang hollow even as they left her mouth. Michael took a step closer. On the side table, a knife used earlier to cut oranges sat innocently, its blade catching the afternoon light. "Tell me everything," he demanded. "Now." The room seemed to contract, the air growing heavy with the weight of decades of secrets. Sarah's composure began to crack, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah's voice broke, barely a whisper. "Your father, he didn't give me a choice." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Michael's hands clenched and unclenched, the DNA results crumpling slightly in his grip. "What does that mean?" he asked, each word precise, controlled. Her story spilled out in fragmented pieces. Early in their marriage, before the children were born, Daniel Reese had used his position of spiritual authority, his influence, to manipulate her. Coercion disguised as pastoral guidance. Abuse masked as divine purpose. "All 5 children," Michael said. Not a question, but a statement. "They're all his." Sarah nodded, her breakdown complete. The perfect pastor's wife, the woman who had stood beside him through countless sermons about family and integrity, now reduced to a trembling confession. Michael's hand moved almost unconsciously. The knife from the side table caught the afternoon light. Sarah saw it. Her eyes widened. In that moment, she knew her life hung by a thread. The room seemed to freeze. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes locked on the knife. Michael's transformation was complete. The compassionate pastor gone, replaced by a man consumed by a rage so pure, so absolute, it seemed to radiate from his very core. "You let him violate everything," Michael said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Our marriage, our children, our faith." Sarah's hand reached out, a futile gesture of protection. "Michael, please." But there was no mercy left in him. The man who had preached forgiveness for years now understood only one language: retribution. In one swift, calculated movement, Michael grabbed the knife. Sarah's scream never fully formed, cut short by the first brutal strike. The blade plunged into her chest, a horrifying punctuation to years of secrets. Her body collapsed, blood spreading across the pristine bedroom carpet, staining the Bible that lay forgotten beside her. Michael stood over her, breathing heavily, the knife still in his hand. The blood on the knife was still warm when Michael walked out of the bedroom. His movements were calculated, devoid of emotion. The man who had once preached about love and forgiveness was now a cold instrument of vengeance. Reverend Daniel Reese lived just 20 minutes away, a short drive that would become the final journey of his life. Reverend Daniel Reese was a titan of Florida's religious community. At 65, he was more than just a pastor. He was a spiritual patriarch whose influence stretched across multiple congregations. Standing slightly shorter than Michael, but with a presence that seemed to fill any room, Daniel had silver hair, piercing eyes that had counseled thousands, and hands that had blessed generations of believers. For decades, he had been the cornerstone of the Reese family's ministry. 3 generations of religious leadership flowed through his veins. His sermons were legendary, fire and brimstone mixed with compassionate guidance that had made him a respected figure in Tampa's Christian circles. Young pastors sought his mentorship. Congregants viewed him as a direct messenger of God's will. Michael arrived at his father's house as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the well-manicured lawn. The same lawn where Daniel had stood countless times, delivering moral lectures, presenting himself as a pillar of the community. He didn't knock. The door opened with a single, determined push. Daniel was sitting in his study, reading his Bible, the same book that had been the foundation of their family's life. He looked up, surprised by the sudden intrusion. "Michael?" he said, confusion crossing his face. Michael said nothing. He held the knife, still stained with Sarah's blood, in his hand. On the street, Mrs. Henderson, Daniel's elderly neighbor, was watering her plants. She heard the first scream, then another, then a series of sounds that made her blood run cold. Through her window, she saw Michael, saw the knife, saw the brutal, methodical way he moved. Her trembling hands reached for the phone. 911 would be her only response. Within minutes, police sirens began to wail in the distance. When the first police cruiser turned onto Daniel Reese's quiet suburban street, Michael didn't move. Blood dried on his hands, his white shirt now a grotesque canvas of crimson. The Bible, the same book that had been the centerpiece of their family's spiritual life, lay open on his lap. Officers approached cautiously, weapons drawn. "Sir, put your hands where we can see them," the lead officer commanded. Michael looked up, his eyes devoid of emotion. "It's done," he said simply. "God's justice has been served." Inside the house, the scene was beyond comprehension. Daniel Reese lay in a pool of his own blood, multiple stab wounds telling a story of unimaginable violence. But it was the final, most horrific detail that would shock even seasoned investigators. Michael had taken his revenge to a level of brutality that defied understanding. As they handcuffed him, Michael turned to one of the officers. "My wife," he said coldly. "She's at home. She won't be moving." The neighborhood, once a picture of suburban tranquility, now stood as a crime scene. Neighbors gathered at the edges of their perfectly manicured lawns, whispering, watching as a respected pastor was transformed into something unrecognizable. The shockwaves of Michael Reese's actions rippled through Tampa's religious community like a devastating tsunami. Grace Community Church, once a beacon of hope and spiritual guidance, stood silent and empty. The massive sanctuary where Michael had delivered powerful sermons became a symbol of shattered trust. Congregation members wandered the streets in a daze, their faces a mixture of disbelief and horror. How could a man they had trusted, a pastor who had counseled them through their darkest moments, committed such an unthinkable act? Whispers spread like wildfire about the betrayal, about the secrets, about the unimaginable truth that had driven Michael to murder. Church elders held emergency meetings. Some defended Michael's character, unable to reconcile the man they knew with the brutal killer now in custody. Others were quick to distance themselves, removing his name from church records, erasing every trace of his existence. The media descended quickly. What had once been a tight-knit community became ground zero for a national story of betrayal, religious hypocrisy, and the darkest corners of human nature. But amid the chaos, 5 children remained, orphaned, confused, their entire world shattered by a truth they were too young to comprehend. The trial of Michael Reese captivated the nation, transforming a shocking act of violence into a courtroom drama laced with betrayal, moral hypocrisy, and devastating revelations. Prosecutors painted a picture of premeditated rage, a man who meticulously planned the murders of his wife and father. Witness after witness testified to Michael's outwardly impeccable character. A dedicated pastor, a loving father, a man seemingly incapable of such horrors. But it was the DNA results that sealed the courtroom's silence, exposing a deeply hidden family secret that tore apart not just the Reese household, but also the church community that had placed Michael on a pedestal. Sarah's secret, revealed in damning detail, forced the jury to confront questions of coercion, abuse, and the betrayal of trust. The prosecution argued that no secret, no matter how egregious, justified murder. But Michael's defense team countered with a narrative of human fragility, portraying him as a man pushed beyond his breaking point by unimaginable revelations. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom became a battleground of ethics versus emotion. The testimonies from church members and family acquaintances painted a disturbing duality, Michael as both victim and villain. Meanwhile, reporters and legal analysts debated whether justice should lean toward the letter of the law or the tragic circumstances that preceded the murders. In the end, the jury's verdict would decide not only Michael's fate, but also the lasting legacy of a man who once stood as a moral compass for thousands. On May 13, 2014, exactly 5 months after the trial began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, spectators, and members of the church community. The air was thick with anticipation as the jury filed back into the room, their expressions somber, their decision final. Michael Reese, once a revered pastor and community leader, stood motionless as the foreperson read the verdict. Guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge's sentence followed swiftly. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The weight of those words rippled through the room, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. As the bailiffs moved to escort Michael away, the sound of his children's cries shattered the stillness. Emma, Jacob, Luke, Sophie, and Benjamin wailed inconsolably as they watched their father being taken from them. The youngest, Benjamin, clung to Emma, unable to fully understand the magnitude of what had happened. With both parents gone, the children were placed in foster care, their once perfect world now unrecognizable. The family that had once been a shining example of faith and unity was now a haunting reminder of betrayal and tragedy. Grace Community Church, once a thriving congregation of nearly 3,000 members, was left in shambles. The sanctuary that had echoed with Michael Reese's fiery sermons now stood eerily silent, its pews nearly empty. The community, once bound by faith, fractured under the weight of betrayal and scandal. Attendance plummeted. Families who had once found solace within the church walls now questioned their faith. Many left, unable to reconcile the image of their trusted pastor with the monster described in court. Those who remained found themselves adrift, clinging to the hope that the church could somehow rebuild.